Alexander is standing on a rocky beach. To the north is dense tropical vegetation. Near the shore are a dozen or so oyster beds. To the north, the island is dense with vegetation. A path to the north leads inland. Large craggy boulders lie on the beach as though pushed up from the sea by giant hands. The blue ocean stretches on for as far as Alexander can see. A string of letters floats in the water. The letters spell out, "Where are you going?" Alexander's heard of alphabet soup, but this is ridiculous. Oyster beds line the seashore. Most of the oysters are sound asleep. One of the oysters is sitting up in bed and doesn't look very happy. He seems to be the only one who can't sleep. In the oyster's mouth, Alexander can see a glint of white. Alexander thinks about calling into the distance, but reasons that it would probably do little good. The rocks don't answer. Alexander's voice gets lost in the rippling of the tide. The sentence floating in the water has nothing new to say. The sleeping oysters only snore in response.
Why aren't you asleep like the other oysters?
Oh, I'm so weary, but I can't sleep. I have a terrible ache in my mouth.
What's wrong with your mouth?
No offense, but it hurts too much to talk.
Alexander can't do anything with the distant foliage from here. Alexander doesn't need to carry around the dead weight of a rock. Alexander doesn't wish to disturb the oysters who are sleeping soundly.
Why don't you let me see if I can help?
No way! No one's looking in my mouth. I hate dentists.
If you're having trouble sleeping, perhaps you'd like me to read to you.
Hey, that would be great.
2 dulcimers raised to the degree of 40 half-dulcimers, divided into equal parts by the third of a cackle of grouse geese, put over the result of 10 fine mackles, albeit small fine mackles, stretched over the total of 53 1/8 bottles of wild beast lard.
Alexander is reading to the oyster that can't sleep. The oyster is trying to listen to Alexander, but he appears to be getting sleepy.
Yields a gilded minnow of precise measurements, 2,069 centidrills by 3,023 6/7 puns, not punts, as might be expected. This is not to say, however, in any sense whatsoever, that deviations in mean temperature of 5 or 6 dregs or so.
There's a large pearl inside the oyster's mouth. Perhaps the pearl is what's keeping the little fellow awake.
Indicate a fabrication or derivation sufficiently broad enough to exacerbate the conclusions uncovered in due course with regards to the dimensions, consistency, mass, or thickness inherent in the menial suckling grouse.
Alexander makes a grab for the pearl.
Hey! You fixed my mouth! It feels great!
The little oyster drifts into peaceful slumber with the rest of his oyster friends. Alexander picks up the object floating in the water. It appears to be a string of letters. They say, "Where are you going?" Alexander decides to keep the odd sentence, even though it is incomplete. The little oyster is sleeping peacefully now that Alexander's removed the irritating pearl. Alexander doesn't want to wake up the sleeping oyster. The flawless pearl is the largest Alexander's ever seen. Alexander is carrying, oddly enough, a sentence. It says, "Where are you going?" Alexander turns the pearl slowly in his hand and sees its opaque white hue melt into iridescent colors. Alexander already has a pretty good grasp on his words. The sentence seems to only have one thing to say. Where are you going? Alexander hears someone coming.
"5 fierce guards of the isle we be. Watch for a foreign man," said he, "with ears and nose, tongue, hands, and eyes. Its nature cannot be disguised. If man it be, then man it dies. Old Tom Troll, smell your smell. Do that which you do so well."
A gnome with a huge nose stands before Alexander. 4 gnomes stand waiting in line. Alexander holds the flower of stench out to the gnome with the jumbo nose.
"Tom Troll I am, that's all I'll be. My nose knows all on land and sea. A flower of stench has washed ashore. A flower 'tis all, and nothing more. Listen, hark you, Groganor, do your duty as you swore. With your ears, please tell us more."
An odd-looking gnome stands before Alexander. He has incredibly huge ears. Alexander winds the tin nightingale and plays it for the gnome with the monumental ears.
"A nose is not a way to spy. My ears cannot be told a lie. A nightingale is all there be. No man is near, and so say me." "Taste, Grump, that we might know whether friend or whether foe."
A squatty little gnome stands before Alexander. He has a huge mouth and a very long curled-up tongue. Alexander holds the mint out for the gnome with the gigantic mouth.
Grump knows a tasty treat. It matters not what others bleat. No danger is this one so sweet.
"Trilly-dilly, use your hands. Is it beast or is it man?"
A gnome with very large hands stands in front of Alexander. Alexander holds the rabbit foot out for the gnome with the huge hands.
"Be all you mad? What aileth thee? A bunny can't trill merrily. A hare does not at all taste sweet. A rabbit here is all we greet."
"Old Bill Batter, never fatter. Vision can resolve this matter. Look you now and end this chatter."
A gnome with gigantic eyes is standing before Alexander. Alexander pours the contents of the empty-looking ink bottle over himself.
By all that's beauteous, fair, and sightly, 4 morons do I sleep with nightly. There's nothing there at all, I say. Enough of this. Let's now away.
Alexander did it! He's fooled the guards!